Good evening, visitors, and welcome to the Australian War Memorial's Last Post ceremony. My name is Sharon Bown, and joining us this evening from the Royal Australian Navy is Captain Lisa Batchelor. We warmly welcome the family of Stanley Joseph Cousins, whose story will be told shortly. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that continue to serve, and the families that love and support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL and Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria and RSL Queensland, who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the pool of reflection by family and by visitors to the memorial. If you are able, please stand and join in singing the national anthem.
Australians, oh, let us rejoice, for we are one and free, with golden soil and wealth for toil. Our home is good by sea. Our land abounds in nature's gifts of beauty, rich and rare. In history's page, let every stage advance Australia fair. In joyful strains, then let us sing, advance Australia fair.
Those requiring a seat, please be seated. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and on operations for more than a century. But first we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths and floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the pool of reflection.
Today we remember and pay tribute to Private Stanley Joseph Cousins. Stanley Cousins was born on the 8th of April 1921 in the Melbourne suburb of Brunswick, the son of Arthur Raymond and Mary Margaret Cousins. His mother died in 1926 when he was just 5 years old. After a failed second marriage and the onset of the Great Depression, Stanley's father went on the road with Stanley and his younger brother Leslie looking for work. Having spent some time in Sydney, the boys were left in the care of the Sisters of Mercy at Cowper Orphanage. Isolated from the rest of their family, the two had an extremely close bond. Stanley looked after Leslie, finished his education at the age of about 12, and was employed on farms in the surrounding area. He continued to support Leslie, who won a scholarship and continued to the Leaving Certificate. When Stanley enlisted on the 5th of August 1941 at the age of 20, he listed Leslie as his next of kin. After a period of training, Private Cousins was granted pre-embarkation leave in early December, and on the 10th of January 1942, embarked from Sydney for overseas service. By the end of January 1942, Australian forces had withdrawn from the Malay Peninsula onto Singapore Island. The 2nd 19th had been holding and defending the vital crossroad at Bakri until they were outflanked. They made a fighting withdrawal through a succession of Japanese roadblocks and were constantly harried from the rear and the air. With ammunition exhausted, casualties mounting, and no chance of relief, the force was obliged to leave its wounded behind. These men were captured and massacred. Only 271 members of the 2nd 19th Battalion were mustered at Yongpen and withdrawn to Johor Bahru. There, the battalion received 650 reinforcements, including Private Cousins, and reorganisation and training commenced. The battalion crossed over the Johor Straits onto Singapore Island on the 31st of January and took up defensive positions on the island's west coast. The wide frontage that the battalion was required to cover, however, meant that its platoons and sections had to be widely dispersed. On the 8th of February, the Japanese landed in the northwest of the island, and within 6 days, they were on the outskirts of Singapore City. The 2nd 19th's position was readily infiltrated, and the battle degenerated into vicious scattered engagements in the dark. Like most of the Australian units involved, it fell into a desperate retreat that ended with surrender on the outskirts of Singapore City on the night of the 15th of February. Cousins had been wounded in action the day before, and on the day of surrender, he was admitted to hospital at the sprawling Changi prisoner of war camp. After recovering at Changi, Cousins left Singapore with Bravo Force on the troop ship Ubi Maru on the 8th of July 1942. After a 9-day journey in poor conditions, the group disembarked at Sandakan, where the prisoners were put to work building airstrips. For the first 12 months, they were treated relatively well. But when Formosan guards began arriving, the treatment of the prisoners quickly deteriorated. Punishment for minor infractions was brutal. Food became scarce, and beatings were common. In September 1944, Allied planes began raiding the airfield, making the airstrips unusable. When the Japanese guards abandoned use of prisoners as a workforce, the death rate climbed sharply. In January 1945, the guards stopped feeding the prisoners and, fearing an invasion, decided to move them to Ranau, some 260 kilometres away. The first forced march occurred that month, and those who fell behind were bayoneted to death or shot. By the 26th of June, only 6 of the prisoners who had left Sandakan were still alive. Of the 2,500 Australian and British prisoners of war, only 6 Australians survived these death marches. Private Stanley Cousins died while a prisoner of war at Sandakan on the 20th of June 1945. He was 24 years old. His name is listed on the Roll of Honour on my left, among almost 40,000 Australians who died while serving in the Second World War. His photograph is displayed today beside the pool of reflection. This is but one of the many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Private Stanley Joseph Cousins, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the reading of the Ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozières or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes the last post ceremony. We thank you all for visiting the Australian War Memorial, and we wish you all a very good evening. Thank you.